Hey guys, welcome back for another episode of The Suited Shootist. I don't typically do response videos, but there's been enough of a recurring theme that I felt like this was worth touching on at least a little bit. So just kind of jump into it, give you a little bit of backstory for those that are unfamiliar. Back in 2018, I was fired from a job for violating company weapons policy. And then that was kind of the launch of The Suited Shootist, because the subsequent job changes are where a lot of this thinking kind of started getting into motion. And so fast forward a couple of years, and June of 21, I put out my story kind of recounting the whole experience, and I'll put that down in the link. But what I wanted to touch on is over the course of the last 2 years, since the video's been up, there have been some kind of recurring themes within the comments that are just so egregiously misinformed that I figured instead of playing idiot whack-a-mole, that it would just be better to address it kind of in one fell swoop. The first being that, people come out and just be adamant that my civil rights were violated and that I shouldn't have submitted, that I was subject to an illegal search and this, that, and the other. And I genuinely hope that these people's grasp of use of force law is stronger than their grasp of civil law, because this was not remotely a constitutional issue in the slightest. There was nothing illegal about the search. The entity searching me was not a government entity. It was my employer. And it was part of my employment contract. For a lot of folks, especially folks that work for larger institutions, especially ones that have any kind of, retail side to the equation, or any that deal with particularly sensitive information or product, it's not uncommon for employees to be subject to search at their employer's discretion. And so, yeah, there was nothing illegal or out of bounds about the search at all. And the people saying such are just factually wrong. I've got several friends that are attorneys. A couple of them are business attorneys, contract law and stuff like that. And, them's the breaks. And that's even setting aside the fact that Texas is an at-will state. So, the whole right to privacy and illegal search and seizure bit is just completely off base. It's unfortunate, but it's wrong. So that then kind of dovetails into the next piece of it, where people will say it's like, oh well, you could have at least refused the search and left with your pride intact. The result would have been the same. Whether I submitted to the search or I refused, at that point, I would have been terminated, or at least very likely would have been terminated. There is a very low probability that, especially given the nature of why they were searching, I would have been fired on the spot either way. So it's a distinction without a difference. And, the reality is pride don't pay the bills. So, it's an irrelevant component to the whole thing, which then bleeds over into the critique. I was like, well, this is why you don't off-body carry. Again, if you paid attention to the actual details of the story, you would realize that kind of where the gun was immaterial. Even if I was carrying it in any conventional fashion, even a lot of the ones that are recommended for denied areas and places like that, they'd have found it. So where the gun was doesn't really contribute to the outcome. It's the fact that there was a gun there in the first place. But for whatever reason, they like to flex that intellectual superiority of the problematic element of this was the fact that I had it in a bag as opposed to strapped to my belt, which again just isn't the case. Which then flows into the next piece of it of, it's like, well, if they didn't know that you were into guns at all, this wouldn't have been a problem. Which technically is a correct statement, and I don't know if this is somebody being intentionally obtuse or if they genuinely miss the point where I talk about when I came on board with the organization. It was at the very least gun tolerant, if not 2A friendly. I mean, quite literally, there was somebody in the service team that was cleaning a suppressor at his desk. So, the whole concept of guns and gun ownership was not a taboo topic when I came on board. And that was the point where the friendships were established and the common ground was established that subsequently, 4 years later, comes back to bite me in the ass. And, if somebody is that level of clairvoyant, awesome. If they're that level of clairvoyant, they probably don't need to carry a firearm because they can see trouble coming way in advance to where they can just avoid it entirely. But that's besides the point. So, again, the piece that gets glossed over is that this transition into a gun-hostile work environment took place over the span of a few years. And over the course of that time, I became a little bit more intentional and discreet about some of that, but I still had friends that I was going and hunting with or shooting with and all this other stuff. So, it's not like I could just, that genie was out of the bottle. So, there's no putting that one back. And the reality of it is one of the subsequent jobs that I had was working for an international organization headquartered in Paris. And I knew that guns were going to be a taboo topic within that work environment, even despite the fact that it was a remote position working from home. And I just, being that cagey and having to be that, that evasive about basic questions like, what did you do over the weekend, got to be rather exhausting. It just, having to suppress, one of my major pastimes was just, it felt very artificial and I didn't care for it. Which then brings me to another point which kind of ties in. It's like, well, that's why you don't make friends at the office. I'm just there to work, yada, yada, yada. Okay. I tried that one too. There was one of the subsequent jobs that I had after all of this unfolded was, and this was a smaller organization, again, gun friendly, so that wasn't really an issue. But I was only really tight with one person in that shop, and when they left, the overall work environment just got to a point where it was unbearable. It was one of the main reasons why I left, frankly, because I no longer had somebody that I could commiserate with and somebody that I was able to, kind of gravitate towards during the course of the workday, and somebody that could kind of serve as a bit of a buffer and a sounding board for all the other bullshit that we had to deal with. So if somebody is wired to the point where they can be that lone wolf and not have any real social interaction with folks in their workplace, I mean, that's fine. That is certainly an option for some people, but it's not an emotionally or psychologically healthy one for me. So that's kind of a big factor. And so I say all that just, because over the course of the last couple of years, invariably these people will come into the comments section and, they're flexing this either moral or intellectual superiority with no desire to actually advance the conversation. And, basically all they're doing is shitting on me for being stupid. And frankly, the truth of it is it was a stupid decision, but, what they're saying is, oh, well, I would have done this. I would, okay, cool, whatever. That really doesn't matter. The only reason that I put any of this out at all is I want people to understand what's truly at stake. And I was accused of being, overly dramatic, melodramatic, what have you, in the video. And that wasn't the case. I didn't play anything up for the sake of theater. Was it an emotional video? Yes, absolutely it was. But I think that in order for it to really make the point that I was trying to make, it had to be. Because what you're seeing there is raw vulnerability. And that makes people uncomfortable. And I hope that it makes people uncomfortable. Because the reality is that this is a very uncomfortable situation that we're looking at. If I were to go back, there are things that I would do differently. And I share these experiences, whether it's about this or whether it's about my training or any of the other stuff that I put out, simply because my goal is to make the learning curve for other people as short and as shallow as it possibly can be. Because I've made mistakes along the way and I've gotten detoured on certain things. And the point of the video is not to discourage anybody from, carrying at work. I would not deign to think that I'm in a position to tell somebody else how to live their life. But I think that it's imperative for people to actually know what's at stake and what the real score is so they can make the most educated decision possible. Because I didn't have that luxury. The sort of general conversation in internet gun space at that point was, if you take your self-defense seriously, you carry, hell and be damned. Because better to have it, not need it, than need it, not have it, yada, yada, yada. And that's a very, very ham-fisted way to look at the whole problem. It's certainly a solution, but it's not appropriate for everybody. And so, I didn't put the thing out fishing for sympathy or anything, and I don't mean to sound ingrateful, because there was a lot of compassion in the comments. There were a lot of very kind words and words of encouragement. And I am truly grateful for that. But to a degree, it doesn't matter. Because again, that doesn't pay any of my bills. And it doesn't undo the damage that was done because of the choice. So, not to say that I don't appreciate it by any stretch, because I sincerely do. But just kind of keep that all in context. So, again, my hope is that this sheds a little bit of clarification, a little bit of light on the whole thing, because, like I said, some of these folks are just coming in, trying to flex their own intelligence and all that. And okay, cool. You can just take that somewhere else, because at this point those comments are just getting muted, because that song gets tired after a couple of verses. But I wanted to address and kind of clarify those points, because if there's somebody there that's going through and is wondering, well, what about this? Why didn't this happen and all that? I think that the questions have some validity, even if they are being brought to the table by folks that are not necessarily operating in good faith. So if you have questions on this or on any of the other experiences that I've shared, please put it down in the comments, because again, that's why I share this material, is to simply help other people along their path. And so aside from that, if you guys have any, have anything like that, and you're not comfortable putting it in the comments, you've got my email address is thesuitedshootist@gmail.com. So if you prefer, or you can DM me on Facebook or Instagram, I'll do my best to get back to you. But yeah, aside from that, I hope everybody has a fantastic week. Stay dangerous and stay sharp.